Good morning. My name is Nayaswami Kabir, and for those I haven't had the pleasure yet of meeting, and it's very nice to see you all here. This is an interesting topic. They all are, of course, but this one starts with a question, an interesting question. How high should we aspire? And not all of these start with a question. And the teacher in me comes out with questions. I love it, because when you're with a student and you want them to think, don't tell them something, ask them something. And that stimulates their brains. So this was an interesting one for me too, because I had to, before I read anything or prepared anything, I was thinking, okay, what is that answer? What do I feel is the answer from within me? How high should I aspire? And in fact, that's word should came up in my thoughts. Should I aspire? How high should I aspire? Which meant to me, okay, that gives me a choice. I can, I have to, I must, I should. Okay, it's recommended, comes highly recommended, in fact. So how high should I aspire if I'm going to attain what I really want in life, which is happiness? So how high? Now, let me ask you a question that's related to this. What do you aspire to today? What is your aspiration for today? Just take 10 seconds, think about that. What are you aspiring to today? Now, second question. What do you aspire to in this life? Put yourself forward to close to the end of your life. What is your aspiration for this lifetime? I feel a lot of thoughts of love and peace and joy in that aspiration for the life, a fulfillment, a complete, absolute fulfillment. But here's the question. What you aspire to for today, how does that relate to what you're aspiring to for your life? In fact, it did not relate too much for me when I did this myself. I thought, okay, I'm aspiring to give a decent service, something that somebody can understand at least. We try. I aspire to complete a project at school today. I aspire to have a wonderful conversation with my wife in Italy, and so on and so forth. All fairly surface kind of things, important to me for this day, perhaps, sort of like a checklist. But actually, they're not truly related to what I aspire to in this life. How high should I aspire in this life? And then we look at it in a different way. Yogananda had a nice, very beautiful, significant vision. And in his vision, kind of a dream vision, he saw that he was one of a group of people in this town, very dusty, dry, desolate, kind of depressing, actually. And people had no smiles on their faces, no joy in their hearts and love, no connection with each other. And they just walked by, and every once in a while, they would look upward, and he would see this flash of joy and hope in their faces, in their eyes, in their smiles. And then they would cast their vision back down again, as if they had given up that thought. And Master walked by in this vision, and he looked up to see what it was. And it was a beautiful mountain. And on this mountain, up at the top, was this land of golden sunshine, this beautiful, eternally loving and light place of being. And he looked down, and he saw the desolation and the pain and the suffering and the lack of hope, and he looked up and said, I want to be there. This is the aspiration that he felt. I want to go into this land to be connected there in that love and that light. But then a thought came into his mind, but it's too hard. It's too far. It's too high. I can't do this. And his spirits dropped again, just as it had for every other person who had walked by this area and looked up. with hope, and then these other thoughts come in, blocking that aspiration. And then he said to himself, but I can take at least one step at a time. I can take at least one step. We can have the aspiration to reach the summit, and we should. But in the day-to-day process and progress toward that attainment, there are the little steps we should take each and every day. And within the days, each and every moment, in each and every thought. Because life is going to challenge us. Our habits, our ways of thinking, our environments, the cultures that we're in, this world that we're in, certainly seeks to hold that thought back, to keep us from thinking like this. The life tells us, you have things to do. You have money to make. You have finances to balance out. You have responsibilities and other many, many tasks in your life. All true to a certain extent. But how can we use those different kinds of experiences to help us to keep climbing up that mountain that Master spoke about? One is that we need a teacher. Someone who has been on that mountain, that has been climbing that mountain. When I was, I think, about 22 years old, I was not yet on the path. I had not read the autobiography of a yogi. I was in New York, and I had no idea about spirituality. I grew up in a Christian home that back in the South to a certain extent, and it was wonderful being a Methodist preacher's kid, actually. But there was nothing about gurus or teachers or reincarnation, not much even about karma in the way that I understand it now. But there was something that was drawing me. I did not know what that was. And I went to an astrologer one day for my first time in my life. I remember only one thing that she told me in this reading. And I didn't know whether to believe anything she was saying, actually, but I felt guided to go to her. And she was telling me this thing and that thing. Okay, that's interesting. Oh, yeah, that's quite interesting. Then she said, you're going to find your teacher soon. I thought, really? And then she said, this is not a normal teacher. This is a true teacher that you are going to be finding soon. Very interesting. Now, I had no idea what a true teacher was. I thought, well, could be a professor at the university I was studying. Who could? And she was saying, no, it's a spiritual teacher. Okay, I didn't even understand what spirituality was. So, at this point, many things started to happen in my life, and within a few weeks, actually, I was in California after that. Within 6 months of being in California, that's a whole nother story, I ended up at Ananda Village back in 1977. And I remembered what she said. I'm going to find my teacher. Now I'm understanding a little bit more. I had read the autobiography of a yogi. I'm going to find a teacher. Now, I didn't equate that with guru at that point. I'll find a teacher. And I looked around. Is he my teacher? No. Okay. Could be, yes. But in other ways, yes. But I started to look around at all the different personalities and people. There's Prakash, and there's Jyotish, and Devi, and Seva. All these wonderful, great souls. Are they my teacher? And I never felt any thought that came in answer to say, yes, that's your teacher. Well, at that particular time, Swami Kriyananda was in India. He had just written the Path, and so he was taking some time in India, and he came back, and for my first time, I met him. He was at Sunday service, giving the talk, and he spoke about his experience in India and his writing of the Path and the meaning of this, and I thought, interesting, okay. And I did not quite connect for some reason in my karma, and I started to be a little resistant. And then something came inside, a kind of a voice. Maybe you've had this happening. And that inner voice said, and surprised me completely. It said, this is your teacher. And I went, oh, Swami Kriyananda is my teacher, a true spiritual guide, to help me to walk up that mountain, knowing that there are problems, there are challenges, there's all we could call opportunities, but there are obstacles and there are opportunities for getting lost on that mountain, climbing up to the top. It's not an easy journey. Most people don't make it to the top. 1 out of 1,000 seek God. 1 out of 1,000 who try to climb up that mountain find God. Ooh, not easy. I need a teacher. I have a teacher. A teacher and a true teaching and a spiritual practice and a guru. Now, the job of the teacher, as Swami has given to us, is to share the deeper understanding and connection with the guru. And Swami was pure devotion, absolute dedication to the guru, a beautiful disciple. And he provided that example and guidance to know how to proceed step by step. And sometimes I would fall, and sometimes I would trip. And for example, I remember one time that I was struggling so much with certain thoughts in my mind, and they were just confounding me and blocking my ability to love and to open up and to surrender in some ways to a higher truth, to hold on to that higher aspiration. And he saw me one day in the airport. He was about to fly away, and he just called me over. And I came over to him, yes, sir. And he said, I didn't even explain what was going on. He just knew. And he said, this can be gone in a moment if you just give it to God. This can be gone in a moment if you just give it to God. I had never talked with him about what this was, but he knew it. He could feel it. He could probably see it in my face. But it was not an easy answer. You can say, oh, that's nice. Just give it to God and it's going to be gone. He went away after that and flew away. And I remember thinking, how do you give something to God? How is that possible? To give a thought to God, a pain to God, a confusion, misunderstanding. And then I realized, I don't think I want to give it to God. And I had to reflect on that. There's something inside that says, well, this pain belongs to me. This confusion belongs to me. I held on to it. Now, I'll come back to how I finally figured this out. But I will say, it took me 3 years of working on that one. How do you give something to God? That was my aspiration for those 3 years. How do you do it? How do you do it? Swami, in those 5 or 6 words, set me off on my path for several years of deeper contemplation and meditation, and it was not easy for me. It sounds simple, but it actually was not, but I'll come back to it. Now, there was when I was at Ananda for about 5 years, I remember Swami had been speaking about he wrote about and talked about something that Swami had said, Master had said. A disciple had come to Master and asked him, when we no longer can see you, will you be as close to us then as you are now? And Master's reply to that question, when you're no longer with us, will we still be close to you? When we no longer can see you, will you still be close? And he said, Master's reply was, to those who think me near, I will be near. Very beautiful. But again, something about thoughts. To those who think me near, I will be near. How do you think God near? But I knew that was part of what I needed to do, just always be thinking God near. But thinking does not mean just with the mind. It also means with the heart, with the soul. there was a moment in a few years after Ananda was, when I came to Ananda, a lady came up to me after service, and it's similar to, I believe, this time when Swami was talking about Master's words on think me near. And she came up, she was doing a survey. She explained, I'm doing a survey just asking people, many people at Ananda, the same question. And she asked me, will you find God in this lifetime? And I said, yes. And she looked back and said, you're the first person to answer like that. Most people, she explained, said, well, I really hope so. Or, I know I have a lot of work to do, but I'm going to try, and so on and so forth. And I didn't hesitate to answer. Now, it's not necessarily because I absolutely know I will, but I knew that if you think him near, he will be near. If I say no, it's another way, or hesitate, it's another way of saying, I'm not sure that I'm with God, or I'm worthy of being with God. I'm not sure that God loves me, or whatever the reason. I'm not placing myself in the close vicinity to God, and I'm not thinking him near. Of course God is near, and of course I'm going to find God. In fact, I suggest that every one of us that are here today have already found God. You know where God is. We all know where God is. We know that God's in our hearts. We know that God is in this holy sanctuary. We know that God is in true friendship. We know that God is in our service when we're thinking of God. We know that God is in our meditation. We know that God is in that stillness. We know that God is in nature. We know that God is in the smiles of every child and every loving human being. We found God. We've all found God. That's why we're here. The question is, how do you know God? Do we know God yet? We have found him. Are we pursuing that? No, that where we know God to be, are we really getting to know God in depth with our hearts and our souls completely? That's not an easy thing to do. And that is the journey that we are all working toward. In the reading today, there was the phrase, be ye perfect. Be ye perfect. And that thought. Because if we say, I must be perfect in order to find God, let's say in order to know God, to become one with God, this is not an easy thing to do. And the mind starts to create all these different obstacles that suggest that we're not really ready for that. Can we actually do that? And again, this is the play of life where we want to be close to God, and part of the mind says, but you're not. But you have problems, but you have challenges that you must overcome first. And this is the duality that we are suffering with in this world. We want to be happy, but we can't quite give it all to God. We hold on to some of those threads and strings that seem to be so real to us, but they are tying our hearts and binding us in our minds. Be ye therefore perfect. Well, there's another way of taking that phrase. Instead of thinking you should be perfect, I take it this way. Ye be perfect. You are perfect. You are already perfect. And that is the truth. We see in our lives, in our hearts, we focus so much on why we're not perfect, how we're not perfect, why our friends are not perfect, why life is not perfect. Well, there's some truth to all of that. But we don't focus on the fact, the truth, the deepest truth. Be ye perfect now. Ye are perfect now. And that is the truth. And our masters have told us this. Yogananda made this statement when asked, what is self-realization? His answer was this: self-realization is the knowing in all parts of body, mind, and soul that you are now in possession of the kingdom of God, that you do not have to pray that it come to you, that God's omnipresence is your omnipresence, that all you need do is to improve your knowing. Ye be perfect. We don't remember that. We don't think like that. We don't reflect that necessarily in our lives, in our aspirations of the day. But it is the truth, and it is the journey. We're on that journey to realize our perfection. You know, there's a word in Sanskrit for this, siddha, a siddha. And siddha means a perfect being, one who has attained perfection. He's realized himself. He's remembered, we might say, a siddha. But there's another meaning of the word siddha, which means cooked perfectly. Cooked perfectly. Now that's an interesting one. Now Sanskrit is very subtle. So one might think, perfect being, cooked perfectly. And I realized, well, okay, life is a hot pot. You know, it's a pressure cooker. And sometimes that heat is pretty intense. Sometimes we don't even want to turn on the stove of our lives and put out any pressure or put anything, and we withdraw. But eventually, we need to cook the ego a little bit. The ego that's that hard shell. Now, what is perfectly cooked food? It's going to be soft. It's going to be tender. Not overcooked, not undercooked, just perfect, al dente. And in our egos, in our way of seeing who we are, there needs to be a process that we go through in life. And the blessings and the gifts of this life is that it gives us the opportunity to cook that ego a little bit, to process it, to reflect on it, to see how it relates to this challenge or that challenge. It is the gift of the Guru and of God. Rajarsi Janakananda was the siddha, perfect human being. He was a disciple of Yogananda's, and he was a businessman. He was very astute, very successful, and very intelligent. And when he was with Master and in his true self, so humble, so soft, so tender. The ego had gone. And it was just God in him, that perfect being that could be reflected in this world, in this life. There's a school in Slovenia that I want to tell you about, and to share a story about how this school was formed. And it relates to this idea. Tina is the name of the teacher, a person there who had this thought, this aspiration for building a school, inspiration, I should say, for building a school in Slovenia for children, an Education for Life school. She had no idea. She had the inspiration, but she had no idea how to do this. And so she went to Shivani, one of our light bearers, ministers up in Italy, and said, Shivani, how do I do this? And Shivani's answer was, we have all these masters, and they're just waiting for you to ask them. So make use of them. An interesting response to that. And so you could take that sort of figuratively, but Tina took it exactly as she said. I'm going to make use of these masters. So she was praying and she thought, Babaji, I've heard that you're very good at materializing palaces. You are in charge of finding our building. Very sweet. And in fact, they found a beautiful building and facility. Babaji responded. And then she thought of Lahiri and said, Lahiri, when I think of you, I think of families, of relationships. Lahiri ji, you are in charge of finding the families and children that we need to come into our school. And after that, the right families would come and be sent into the experience. And then she thought, when I think of Yukteswar, I think of a teacher. Sri Yukteswarji, I humbly ask you to be in charge of bringing us the right teachers. And soon enough, they came. And then she thought, Yogananda, you are my best friend. You are my counselor. You're my guide. I just need you moment by moment to be with me, guiding my thoughts, my actions, my attitudes. You're the principal of this school. And soon enough, this beautiful school was formed. The building, the right teachers, the right families, and all things were coming together except for the finances. They were struggling with the finances. And then she recalled, oh, there's one more I could ask. Rajasi, you're a good businessman, I've heard. You're in charge of our businesses and our finances. So would you please take care of that? And soon enough, the finances started to work and to flow. The aspiration that she had, the inspiration was to form a school. Her higher aspiration was to say, it's not me that's doing this. I'm here to help God do it. But God's really in charge of all these different aspects in the development of this school. She was letting go of the ego's involvement, of the ego's attachment, how it should be, and just simply relating to the truth that God is with us, that our aspiration should be to include God in everything, to live in that way. When I went to Scotland for 6 months, I was taking a break, and I needed to just explore what Scotland was like, because I had felt past life, well, actually my ancestors come from Scotland, and I felt drawn to Scotland. But I didn't want it just to be a normal tourist type of an adventure. It actually was, for me, a spiritual adventure. So I dedicated myself to approaching it in this particular way. I landed in Scotland, and again, I was doing kind of what we might say a walkabout with my backpack. No plans. I got out of the airport, and I just said, God, where are we going today? God, who are we going to talk to? What are we going to see? What are we going to do? Where am I going to sleep tonight? It's all yours, God. And it worked. For 6 months, every day, same prayer. And it took me all over Scotland. I met the most amazing people, and the most wonderful adventures came. And never once was there a problem. Everything, I had challenges, good challenges, wonderful challenges that all were filled with growth and blessings, but never anything that was really considered a deep level of struggle for me. Filled with blessings. Again, we aspire to include God in our lives, to have our teacher, to have our guru, to feel God's presence in everything, and to include him in the daily activities in every single moment, in every breath that we take. Swami, when he was 18, wrote a story called The Land of Golden Sun and Shine. The Land of Golden Sunshine, he said, was the best model, the best book that modeled who he was, that shared the mood of who he was, I should say, better than any other book that he had ever written. Now, this is a story of a young girl who lived in the town like at the base of that mountain, dry, depressed, discouraging, lacking love and joy and friendship. And she lived there. And she worked in a factory of just sewing buttons onto shirts. 6 days a week, she would go in, sewing the buttons onto the shirts. And she knew, she felt inside, something's missing. What? I don't know. She had no teacher at that time that she was aware of. She had no guru that she was aware of. She had no support system that she knew of. She was alone in one way. But something in her heart started to call, there's more. There's more. There has to be more in my life. And so what she did, she prayed. She started to speak inwardly to a higher energy. Is that coming from here?
Yes, it is. It's when your string rubs on your microphone, I believe.
When the string? Oh, really? Sorry about that. I should have pulled that off earlier. It's rather annoying. Okay, good enough. So, better? Okay. So, she prayed on Saturday night. She was feeling, I want to feel the joy. I want something more. And in the morning when she awoke, there was a beam of light coming into her room through the window. And in the beam of light materialized a beautiful being of light. And he was smiling and looking at her. And she felt the joy bubbling up in her heart and the light in her soul starting to catch on. And she felt this desire, and she came over and knelt before him. That's not that one.
That's your beard. What are you going to do?
My beard? Razor blade? Really? That's not right. Sorry about that. Okay, good. So, this being of light came to her and looked in her eyes and smiled, and she felt the joy and the love. And then he started to sweep the light toward her. And the light came upon her face, and it was so bright, so powerful, so strong, that a part of her shut down. You know, one of the hesitations that we have toward finding God is really letting go and merging into that light. A lot of people are afraid of that. And so she shut down, she closed her eyes, and then when she opened, he was gone. And one part of her was filled with joy that she just found a light being, a soul of love. And another part was sad, that she could not tolerate the beautiful, intense light that was coming from this divine, perfected being. But then she went into her work week, and she was joyous, and she kept the memories of that moment, those moments filled her with joy. And she was a different person as she was sewing, and it was noticed. Saturday night came, and she hoped, maybe he'll come back. Sunday morning, the light beam came back, and she was awakened with the light. And she came and knelt before this wonderful being of God. And he looked at her with a smile on his face, and the joy and the love, and said, I'd like you to come with me. I'm from a land of golden sunshine. It's a place of joy, of light, of divine presence of God. It's a place of absolute happiness and freedom. And the light started to come toward her. And her response was, I want to go, but I'm not good enough. She hesitated because those thoughts in the mind telling her she was not up to it. She was not adequate. She was not a perfected being like he was. She had so many flaws. I'm not able to go. And that thought melted inside of her heart, helped to melt her heart. And she withdrew again, and when she opened her eyes, he was gone. The third week came, the third Saturday, and again, hoping that still there was some way that he would come again, even though twice she had rejected that light in some way. And he came again on that Sunday morning with the light when she opened her eyes and saw him, felt, oh, thank you, Lord, you have come again. And she knelt before him. the great joy. This time she was determined, I cannot let my hesitations interfere. I need to go into God. I need to go into this light. And he again said, I want you to come with me. And he explained, so few, I have invited so many, and so few have come. Only a handful. And just as Yogananda had said, out of 1,000 people, one seek him. She was the one. Out of 1,000 who seek him, one find God. Most go a little ways and resist and fall back again, just to walk around that mountain a few more times, taking a step up and a step back, and a step up and a step back. It's a pattern that most follow. She was determined not to fall into that. And she said, yes, Lord, I want to be with you. I let go of all my attachments. I'm not needed here anymore. There's nothing more in this world for me. I want to be in that land of golden sunshine. I want to be in the light. I want to live my life with you, with an open heart, with a soul that's filled with joy. And the light started to sweep by her and through her. And in the next moment, she was gone. Her soul was lifted into God. This is the journey that we're all on. God didn't come to her and say, you need to be perfected before. Basically, all he said is, open your heart to me, and I will enter and take charge of your life. Open your heart to me, and I will enter and take charge of your life. The whole journey is just that, love. We meditate so we can find that place of deep stillness and peace. And in that deep place of stillness and peace, we'll feel the joy and the love. And know that that is who we are as the perfected human soul, the whole perfected soul in human form. We don't have to be perfect in every other way, but perfect in the love, yes. When Swami said to me, this can be done in a moment if you just give it to God. That pain and suffering I'd had probably for years. And for 3 years I had to try to understand, how do you give something to God? And yes, I want to. No, I don't. Yes, I do. No, no. And then I realized that I've made God my best friend. Yogananda became my best friend. Yogananda and masters and all the masters and God, there's nothing more important in this life than that relationship with God. I can play the roles, I can play the games, but there is nothing that exists that is more important. But that's one way I can say that. Am I really showing that? I'm attached to some of those pains. I'm attached to some of those ways that people respond. I'm attached to some of my likes and dislikes. And those likes and dislikes block my feeling of love for God. How do you give something to God? I finally figured it out. Love God more. There was one time a moment where I had after about 5 years at Ananda, I did a workshop, and I had already declared in my heart, Yogananda is my best friend, forever. And this fellow at this workshop said, okay, think of your best friend. And I thought of Yogananda. Good, easy. And then he said, think of saying goodbye to your best friend. Say goodbye and see how it feels. And I said, oh, okay, I can do that. Bye. It was the biggest mistake of my life. God comes to our hearts out of our own invitation, our attitudes, our thoughts. Think me near and I will be near. And I had dismissed him. just like that. Say goodbye. And he went. I cried for 3 days. It was so painful not to have that presence of God in my heart. And I learned something spectacularly important. That so much of what I thought was me was not me. It was another part of me that God had brought in. That was a higher part of myself. It was the Guru within. That was that joy, that vitality, that enthusiasm, that willingness, that creativity or intelligence. It was all God's. It was not mine. And as soon as I said goodbye, I was left to a hard shell. There was hardly anything left inside. And I had never realized that 98% of my being was as a result of my having invited God to be part of my life. I learned a lot. After 3 days of crying, saying, God, I don't mean it. I meant it. It was my mistake. After 3 days, it came back. And I felt peaceful again and loving again. And we go back to the thought, how high should we aspire? We should aspire to love God with all our hearts, with all our minds, with all our souls, with all our strength. We should aspire to love God with all our hearts, with all our minds, with all our souls, with all our strength. God alone in life, and God in life will take us, and the light will come over us, and we will say, God, I'm ready. I'm yours. Hare Om.